Hey there, guys. Alrighty, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions, and this time returning to Trope Talk, Pure of Heart. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Alright, Pure of Heart. I honestly don't think I'm gonna actually have that much to say here. I do love me a wholesome character, but it is a rather simplistic trope. It's kind of something that runs along the similar lines of the comedic relief in terms of what this character can do for emotional impact, right? Like the pure of heart character becoming sad is a very strong indicator of a tonal twist, change, shift within the story, right? If your pure of heart guy is sad, then you know things are looking bleak, right? So like if pure of heart character is sad, then you know you're in the part of the story that's like the, around the climax sort of thing. If it's just like a standalone novel, um, sort of dealio. What else? Characters that are pure of heart examples. Um, I know she's gonna be using Aang in this video because I saw like when you hover over a YouTube thumbnail now, it kind of like plays a little preview. I would say Luke Skywalker is pure of heart. Gonna get Star Wars referenced right away here. And that's why I do not like Ryan Johnson's version of Luke Skywalker, because to me Luke is not that. Characters in Star Wars are very simplistic. And of course, right, like the sequel trilogy, I don't this is my opinion, right? What the sequel trilogy character should have been is the sequel characters should have been more complex characters. I mean, Han Solo and Princess Leia are complex characters, but characters like um, Luke should have like a character like Luke should have remained the same as he had been, because he is kind of his purpose as a character, especially in the original trilogy, his purpose, and then in every other time we have fucking seen him, even in Disney Star Wars and the rest of Disney Star Wars, we've seen Luke. In Mandalorian, Luke is very much um kind of that beacon of hope, that pure of heart character. He is not nihilistic. He's like, yes, he went through something tragic. But this is the same man that watched the two people that raised him. He came home and saw their charred corpses. And still this man was able to go on. Right? Like, and be pure of heart. Like you can't have Luke bring his father back to bring fucking Darth Vader out of the dark and back into the light. And then 30 like have that same character become nihilistic and grumpy old hermit. No. 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 It doesn't you can make it make sense in terms of like on paper. But in here, it's not gonna vibe. It's not gonna vibe.
Morality is very complicated. There are thousands of years and millions of pages of discourse about what it means to be good versus bad. Philosophies
Morality. Hold on. I don't think that. I don't think morality is all that complex. Being good is, helping people and not murdering, protecting the weak, that kind of vibe. Protecting people, helping people, just keeping people safe and not like, forcing yourself upon others, that sort of thing. I don't. feel like killing is kind of generally always bad.
Religions have enumerated many different ways to conceptualize this, from systems of cyclic reincarnation with the quality of life determined by past good deeds, to impassive death gods weighing hearts against feathers and devouring those weighed down by sin, to omniscient deities doling out eternal rewards and or punishments to those judged deserving, to just not being a jerk because being a jerk feels bad, to about a million others. And that doesn't even touch on the varying definitions of what good deeds and sin and deserving even mean. Loving thy neighbor might get you into one god's good graces, while slaughtering your enemies might save you a seat next to another one. All that to say, there's a lot of reasons why we might have some trouble concisely defining the pure of heart trope. Now, in general, pure of heart is a concept
An assessment of an unusually good / moral character. Exact specifications vary wildly. Often a metaphysical assessment made by a supernatural force can be a prerequisite for accessing a location, artifact, and or magic power, often equated with worthiness, usually describes some innate property rather than the morality of their actions.
that classifies certain characters as moral paragons with no evil in their hearts, and what the hell that means depends strongly on the author, the character, the setting, the world lore, the phase of the moon, and whether or not they had breakfast that day. Purity of heart is often more of a metaphysical assessment than a practical one. Some supernatural entity or force will determine with 100% certainty that a given character is pure of heart, and while sometimes the character will have to do something tangible to demonstrate that in a test of character, sometimes it's just the vibes they're giving off. Frequently, being deemed pure of heart is a prerequisite for something, like gaining a power or access to a place or thing. In these circumstances, it's basically equated with worthiness, with the indication that most people aren't worthy and would fail in this situation, and thus the pure of heart character is shown to be rare and special due to their purity of heart. This is a classic concept with roots in fairy tales, where heroes will often be rewarded solely for their intrinsic goodness. Now, there are basically three contexts.
Context number 1. Supernatural worthiness tests character as judged pure of heart by a supernatural force and is rewarded. Often results in a power-up or an artifact of some kind. Ooh, 100% good boy.
That a character's purity of heart might show up in. The most blatant is the aforementioned supernatural
For this, I would have drawn a dog instead of a person, just for the joke.
worthiness
Good boy.
test, where a magically judgmental being or object will assess a character's purity of heart to decide whether or not they're worthy of some magical plot thing. Not all supernatural worthiness tests focus on being pure of heart, but they are pretty heavily correlated. These tests sometimes involve a character actually doing something heroic to prove their worthiness, but as a general rule, the magically judgmental thing can just tell if the character is worthy or not by gazing into their innermost heart or something. Choosing magical artifacts frequently fall into this category and just won't work in the hands of anyone deemed unworthy. As a consequence, this category is probably the one that seems the most arbitrary. It might be totally unclear why one character qualifies and another one doesn't, or why a character's more dubious actions or qualities don't disqualify them from pure of heartness. But you can't exactly argue with a choosing magical artifact. Then again, this can also be a strength of the trope, because if you want a really obvious signal that a character is trustworthy or a previously iffy character has undergone character development, you can just have the choosing magical artifact prove it by spontaneously deeming them worthy. It's essentially a shortcut to demonstrate that they're a good person now. The second, somewhat rarer context,
Impossibly pure. Characters so unusually good that things that leverage their presumed latent badness just straight up don't work. Almost always contextualized with the idea that everyone is a little evil except this weirdo.
we find this trope in is in the impossibly pure trope, where a character being pure of heart is framed as an incredibly unlikely occurrence because the prevailing assumption is that everyone is a little bit evil, but the character assessed is so magically incorruptible that this just isn't true of them, which often stuns the testing entity, which simply can't believe that anyone is that genuinely good. This doesn't usually show up with choosing magical artifacts, which tend to work on the assumption that someone's gonna be worthy, but sometimes it shows up when a villain has some kind of corruptive ability or magical attack that manipulates the evil in someone's heart, and it just doesn't work on this character because there's nothing for it to hit. Pretty specific, but honestly really funny whenever it happens. And finally, the most mundane option, sometimes
Practically pure. It's not supernatural, but the character is seen as completely incorruptible. These characters might struggle with internal temptations to ungoodness, but they will never succumb to
a
them.
character is practically pure. There's nothing magical about it. No supernatural judge giving them the certified good boy seal of approval. This is just a character who is completely morally incorruptible. They can't be swayed by selfish desires. They'll always do what they believe to be right, no matter the personal cost. They might think about taking the selfish option, but they will never actually do it. Paragons frequently overlap with this. This pure of heart character will always do the right thing even if it comes at a cost, and they often won't even indulge in angst over it, since angst would imply regrets, and one never need regret doing the right thing. But that's a matter of the character's individual personality. Some of these incorruptible characters do indulge in a little angst, but they'll still hold to their principles even if they're tempted to let them slide. For this trope to apply, the character has to be seen as incorruptible in-universe, not just by the audience. Characters in this context will often be able to heroically resist things that overwhelm other, less pure of heart characters, both mundane things like bribes and threats, and more fantastical things like possession and mind control. But while these contexts illuminate some of the stories that use the pure of heart trope, we still haven't actually defined what it means for a character to be pure of heart. What character traits are these supernatural judges even looking for? Well, unsurprisingly, that also varies a lot. For instance, in some stories, a character might be judged pure of heart if they are never tempted.
For a character to be pure of heart, they must never even consider the bad option. This paradigm judges a character on what they think, not what they actually do, and is often seen as flawed nowadays.
In this model, a character even considering a temptation towards evil is enough to disqualify them from pure of heart status. Heroically struggling to resist that temptation, or considering it before realizing the consequences it'll have and rejecting it, aren't good enough. The only way a character can be truly pure of heart in this structure is if they never even consider taking the evil option. This is generally considered to be a fairly flawed structure, and might even be called out in-universe for being unfair and or unrealistic. Most moral frameworks agree that what a person does matters significantly more than what a person thinks about doing, so for someone to be judged in a sense irredeemable for something they didn't even actually do is pretty unreasonable. Stories with this framework will often address that unfairness and suggest that the test itself is flawed. Nowadays, it's more common for purity of heart to be equated with selflessness.
A character proves their purity of heart by doing selfless actions, and heroism depends on action rather than peeking into their heart directly and judging intent, often established by a test of character.
In these paradigms, purity of heart is equated with self-sacrifice and putting the needs and wants of others before one's own. A pure-hearted character in this framework frequently demonstrates their selflessness by giving up a shot at some sort of prize to help someone in distress, which often nets them the true prize of whatever their pure of heartness gives them. This is probably the most solid and well-established definition, as it's easy to demonstrate and disprove, and it's an active choice the character makes, not some latent property they have no say or control over. It also allows for character development, as a previously self-centered character can grow and change to become selflessly heroic and thus worthy. And if you've got a magical choosy artifact in the neighborhood, it might pop up to signal to the audience that the character's finished developing and is a certified good boy now. Selflessness is also often demonstrated by way of a heroic sacrifice, which is always good for drama. And as a bonus, if your heroic sacrifice nets you some kind of magical power-up, it can even involve a fake-out death before the pure of heartness gets demonstrated, etc., etc. Very standard stuff. Now, in more old-school media, like Victorian-era fairy tales and the early Disney
Pure of heart as in kind and forgiving, a character whose purity of heart is shown by how incredibly kind and nice they are. They never get angry and usually put up with a lot of suffering without complaint, typically rewarded by fairy godmother intervention. Because I am a fan of the classic trope, a lot of the classic ideas of this trope, going into, or classic ideas of tropes, going into like, the Tolkien sort of thing, the author of T.H. White, Once and Future King. I do like the idea of kind and forgiving, as the pure of heart. This would probably be where more I tend to line up, I would say.
Movies derived from them, it was common for pure of heartness to be equated with being kind and forgiving. Fairy tale heroines, for instance, are almost always pathologically incapable of standing up for themselves, but will be rewarded for their kindness by the universe itself, which bends around them to solve their problems. These characters,
and again, it's a bit of an escapist kind of thing in that regard, right? Like, by just being kind and forgiving, the world will reward you. It's not going to happen in our real world 99.999% of the time. I'm not going to say for certainty it will never happen, but 99.999% of the time, being kind and forgiving, the world is not going to just reward you for that, unfortunately. But yeah, I like it in my fantasy, though. I really do. I don't like morally gray characters. I mean, now that the strike is over, I can really talk about Star Wars again, the newer Star Wars shows. Even though technically I shouldn't have even talked about them at all. I don't know. It was a very weird area. The rules were very kind of confusing. I would see like some people that were very firm on like not talking about stuff at the beginning of the strikes, and then they like gave up on it. And it's just like, all right, did the rules change that I'm unaware of? Like, what's going on here? You were so firm at the beginning, and now you've stopped. Now you're talking about this stuff again. It's like, What? You're confusing me because I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And also the SAG after rules were kind of confusing as well when it came to, at least I found them a little confusing. Maybe I just misread them and I'm stupid. Um, I found them a little um, not the most clear. At least the initial rules. I didn't really check the later ones. I should have. Anyways, solidarity. Um, hopefully, at least as of recording this, it hasn't officially been accepted. Right? It's just been like a. So far, this is what the leaders agree on. Now the lawyers got to discuss it. But anyways, like Cassian Andor, um, he is a somewhat. He is a pretty gray character. Um, and that's kind of why in Rogue One I didn't like when they announced the Andor show. I was like kind of up in the air about it, like very like this is not needed because I like Jyn Erso more because she was that pure of heart character. Jyn is she's had a rough life, but she is still pure of heart. She is still like no, we gotta fight back. We gotta do something. Um, uh, But then in the Andor show, what they do is that they have characters outside of Cassian being like that pure of heart, like Nemec's manifesto, uh, Cassian's adoptive mom, adoptive father. They were pure of heart people, So like the surrounding characters are pure of heart to push Cassian to who he becomes by the end of Rogue One and of time of his death. Um, and I still love Cassian as a character, but I don't know if that's. I'm not sure. It's probably a mix of both, obviously, but I'm not sure which is carrying it more: the skilled writing or Diego Luna being such a fantastic fucking actor with just natural charisma. I'm not sure which is up top there. But anyways, watch the Andor show. Now that Strike is over, I can really be like, watch the Andor show. Um, and yeah, like um I like my characters being pure of heart. Um, because they're the ones that I enjoy being in the minds of. Because they're not as depressed. Like I think you can have a pure of heart character that is still um depressed. Um, I would actually kind of consider Kaladin, though Syl is of course pure of heart. Um, in the Stormlight archives, I would kind of consider Kaladin to be pure of heart. He has those moments where he does genuinely think the bad thoughts, but he never like this, like right what she was saying earlier, like um a lot of the time nowadays when we think of pure heart, we don't consider people that consider the bad thoughts. Um, we don't consider them pure of heart. I do consider those still as pure of heart. I am of the mindset that action is is ultimately what matters more than just thinking things. Uh, right? Our brains are illogical and our brains are fucking stupid. Our brains are going to think of things that we normally wouldn't have in moments of like weakness, despair, depression, right? Our brains are going to think of things that we normally wouldn't. But it's ultimately our actions that speak for our character in my eyes. And so Kaladin never really, at least I've only read the first two books. Kaladin always ends up making the right decision. Sometimes maybe he ends up making the right decision almost a little late. Especially at the end of Words of Radiance, he almost corrected his mistake a little too late, but he still got there in time. And he was able to save the day. But yeah, I would, I like being in the mind of characters that are ultimately pure of heart, that are going to make the good decisions. I don't like the kind of lean towards that I think modern fantasy is somewhat taken, where, or at least what seems to be popular on TikTok with books, is that these characters just are, not pure of heart. Like they're more like there's this just calling for morally gray. And it's just like I kind of find it uninteresting. I don't find them to be interesting characters. They just tend to be bland, really. Like I find the characters that are good-hearted to be more interesting. Um because you could throw them in like a bleak world or into bleak situations, and then it kind of also speaks on perhaps the cleverness of the writer themselves to have a pure of heart character put into a bleak situation, but that character is still able to maybe do mental gymnastics to think of that situation in a pot, or like find light at the end of that tunnel. Because yeah, I just find that more interesting. I don't know how better to explain it. I just fucking love that, you know?
Are usually kind, generous, humble, and incapable of expressing any emotion south of quiet ennui. They respond to cruelty and suffering with the beatific patience of a saint. In this paradigm, anger is treated as a component of being bad, and while a character might suffer endless injustices, they prove their purity of heart by never indulging in anger or revenge by lashing out or fighting back. This is questionable, and in these stories, the character is almost always helped by someone who is either powerful enough to circumvent these problems the character is facing, or is not pure of heart and willing to stop those problems with their bare hands. The first approach is rather more common. Fairy godmothers ex machina, friendly animals, and other such fairy tale staples will usually orchestrate a scenario where the protagonist can rise above their problems without getting their hands dirty. In more modern stories, however, this pure-hearted character might have a rather more angry supporting cast and or love interest willing to stand up for them when they can't. And finally, some stories equate purity of heart with being very naive.
Yeah, a character who is pure of heart because they have no understanding of bad stuff, unlike the forgiving kind, known to become very angry when exposed to injustices, usually young and sheltered, at least to start. This one's also fun. This is very much kind of, you could say, YA tropey, but it's satisfying. It's satisfying when the character that is like pure of heart and naive uh, becomes exposed to injustices and they just want to fucking throw hands. I love that shit too.
These characters are pure of heart because they genuinely don't seem to understand anything else. They can't comprehend evil or even just general not niceness, and they're pure of heart because they have no idea what the alternative is. These characters are typically quite sheltered when they start out, and will sometimes undergo arcs where they're exposed to the unpleasantness of the world and actually lose their uncritical goodness. But in cases where these characters are explicitly deemed pure of heart by the narrative, exposure to the moral complexities of the world doesn't tend to affect their good-heartedness at all. They might be confused or dismayed at the more unpleasant.
This is the thing that Netflix has to nail when it comes to their live action adaptation. They have to, if they make Aang, they cannot make Aang cynical. They can't. Um Aang has to remain just that good-hearted person that he is. And of course he has a couple episodes where he does like I think where he does lash out, but or go reserved into himself. But they're very sparse and they're not like the only time I think we ever see Aang truly get angry is when Appa is stolen. Like that's the only situation. Um and even then it doesn't last long. It doesn't last that long. Um so yeah. Um I saw the trailer for the live action and I really want it to be good, but also like I don't know what they can do to this. Like this is my main uh worry is like why are they telling this story but in live action when there really isn't anything to make better, honestly. There's nothing really that needs to be changed to the original story of Avatar The Last Airbender to make it better. Now, Legend of Korra could use a fix purely because when you watch it, season 1 was meant to be the only season of Korra. There was not meant to be a season 2, 3, or 4. Or while the writers were not aware, were not certain that they would get uh, more than one season on it, because Nickelodeon was being a bag of dicks. And so they wrote one season as a closed off season with a little bit of potential to continue it on. But really, right, when you look at the format, especially of how Avatar The Last Airbender worked, where we kind of have Aang learning a new element each season. Season 1, he learns water. Season 2, he learns earth. Of course, he learned a bit of fire in season 1, but then he got scared of learning it and stopped. season 3, he finally gets back and conquers his fear of hurting others through fire, and he masters fire bending. Korra's introduction is she's already got water, earth, and fire. And then her story throughout season 1 is her becoming an airbender. And then, of course, seasons 2, 3, and 4 are supposed to be more of character look. But, right, because, like, there was no... They couldn't plan for that in season 1. Kind of just feels a bit... story feels removed from itself. That's a good way of explaining. It doesn't feel entirely connected until season 3 and 4 are connected to each other, because they got the go ahead. They knew when they got season 3, they knew they'd be working on a season 4. But yeah,
parts, but it won't make them any less friendly or kind. These characters are almost...
Korra could be improved with a live action adaptation. I don't see how Avatar: The Last Airbender really could be improved with live action. I don't know, like, maybe they can show us some more flashbacks that weren't shown, but then of course that runs the risk of, like, is this going to be then more targeted for the fans of the series that are now adults, or is it going to still be a children's show, right? Like, how much into the, like, how deep into the discussion of colonialism and genocide are we going to go into? Because they did do it pretty well in Avatar: The Last Airbender when writing it also still for children. But there's only so much you can really do before it becomes, like, kind of iffy, like, oh, this might be too much for a child to really handle, you know? Especially in live action, because, like, in a cartoon, you can suspend your disbelief of them being people, right? It's easier to, like, cartoon violence. You cannot portray cartoon violence in live action all that well. I'm rambling.
Completely non-malicious. Anything they do comes from a genuine place of wanting to help or do the right thing. This has some overlap with the kind and forgiving version, and they both seem to draw on a concept of goodness that equates goodness with...
I mean, also another thing that I think... I do want to... I've been very kind of cynical here. Cautiously optimistic, I'll say, for the show. What I do like, though, is that it is a, like, all, indigenous and Asian cast. I like that. I'm glad that they are doing that. Because, right, you look at the original series, I think only, as far as I'm aware, off the top of my head from what I'm remembering, only Iroh and Zuko are voiced by Asian actors. Everyone else I think might have been white. And then I don't know if there were any black voice actors in the original show. I don't know the casting for I think Korra did a little bit better, but still widely white.
With innocence, specifically the version of innocence equated with childishness or ignorance, Garden of Eden style. It is interesting that people equate childhood with innocence, as if children aren't capable of incredible malice and cruelty when they want to be. I mean, have you met middle schoolers? But regardless of realism, the trope still stands. Sometimes
I think that's because of the, if you have a child being naive and forgiving, or having that childlike innocence, we tend to also then have their parents being a bit like that. Or if you want to go the more tragic route, perhaps that child holds on to their childlike innocence as a sort of maybe a trauma reaction, a fear reaction, and that's why they cling on to their childlike innocence because of their home life. Or, right, then it gets the nature versus nurture sort of discussion.
Purity of heart means childlike idealism, sheltered from the gray complexities of the world. Unlike the kind and forgiving variant, these pure of heart characters can and frequently do get angry, but it'll be like a righteous anger at an injustice in the world that they didn't know was possible. Oddly, these pure of heart characters seem to be disproportionately likely to actually do a lot of morally dubious stuff, whether or not the narrative seems to realize that's what they're doing. Because they're 100% non-malicious and don't seem to realize what the consequences of their actions might be, they don't get deemed bad by whatever's doing the judging. judging. And there's something to that, actually. Pure of heart isn't really the same thing as pure of action. The trope is explicitly framed to describe something about the way the character internally functions, not how the character's actions affect the world
You're
around them.
twisting
There's a
it,
reason
Red.
large
Ooh, I
swaths
like
of this
that.
trope are just dedicated to magically judging the character's inherent nature with some kind of mystic vibe detector rather than referencing any of their actual actions. The character's actions might realistically matter more than their intentions, but this judgment is specifically assessing those intentions. The never tempted variant exists for a reason, and even if it's mostly deconstructed these days, it does represent an important component of this trope. A never tempted type character who never even considers the morally bad option is indeed pure of heart by the simplest definition possible. Their heart and mind is clear of self-centered or malicious motivations. That's not a mandatory prerequisite of doing good things, of course. Someone can have self-centered or malicious motives and still only do good things, but it can be argued that the whole point of the pure of heart trope is to assess what characters have literally no bad stuff in their hearts. This varies, of course. For instance, the practically pure types that are just completely incorruptible can still have malicious or selfish impulses. In fact, it's very common for them to have those impulses, since what makes them pure of heart is that they never ever act on those impulses, hence their incorruptibility. It's difficult to demonstrate that you're incorruptible if you're never faced with the temptation of corruption. This is a different spin on the definition, since it acknowledges that the character has darkness in their heart, but actively chooses to keep it contained. In some stories, that's not enough, and to qualify as pure of heart, a character must have exactly no dark impulses anywhere in their head. This dissonance dates as far back as ancient Greece. Even Aristotle burned entire chapters debating whether it's more evil to know something is bad and still do it, or to be so bad you don't even recognize what badness is. This specific debate shows up all over the place, including Skyrim of all places, where the dragon Parthenax asks the player if it's better to be born good or to overcome one's evil nature through great effort. Blue assures me that this space of moral philosophy is really fun to discuss over a glass of something alcoholic and fancy, but unfortunately all that fascinating nuance gets flattened pretty hard just by virtue of how this trope works. See, this definition starts becoming a problem the minute we look.
See, the real answer to that question is that neither is superior over the other. They're both, they both are equal. You know, being born good does not make you inherently better than someone that has faced hardship and struggles and is powering through that. And neither does, you know, having gone through tough times and powering through that, that doesn't make you better than someone that was fortunate enough not to experience those same things. Because if we're like, no, only people that experience bad, and then do good things, they're the only ones. They are more value. That is better or whatever. If we equate it to that, then we're not really progressing. In my eyes, we're not. Right? We want to get to a world like the ideal end goal, right? The ideal end goal is that we strive for, that I personally think that we want to strive for, is we get to a world, get to a place where no one is going through those rough times, and then still having to fight with their internal feelings of, being good or whatever, right? They're not letting the bad that has happened to them, they're not putting that back out to the world. They are like, no, I'm not going to be like what has been done to me. I'm going to be better. The end goal is to not have that and just have people just being naturally good because that is the experience that they have had. That is their lived, right? Like no more childhood trauma, right? That is right. These are okay. Ignoring the collateral damage, just pure of heart, good deeds. Mixed impulses, active choice, good deeds. Equal. These are equal.
Look at it closely, and that's never
Parthenax's quote of, "Is it better to be born good or to fight off your evil nature," or whatever the fuck the actual quote is. I've played the game so much, but I can't remember. She just said the quote, and I'm blanking on it because so many words are in my head. They're equal. The one is not superior over the other.
good sign. As mentioned, pure of heart doesn't mean pure of action. A character can be very much not pure of heart and still basically only do good things. But on the flip side, a character that is pure of heart, even by the strictest definition, can do a lot of very bad stuff. Just because the character's motives are selfless and righteous doesn't mean their actions are going to be morally flawless. A character whose purity of heart is the childlike innocence variant, for instance, might be completely open to befriending some very bad people, and in pursuit of that might incidentally enable some very bad things if they let those very bad people go on their merry way instead of taking more extreme measures to stop them for good. But that's just one example. Suppose a character is given a choice between two options, A and B, and they know that picking option A will result in something bad happening. If the character knowingly chooses to make something bad happen by picking A, we could, to simplify a freshman year ethics course, conclude that they did something bad. Even if they picked A for the best of reasons, they'd still be knowingly and consciously causing the bad consequences. Maybe it'd be worth it, maybe it wouldn't be worth it, maybe they knew it was going to be a hard choice with no right answer and they did it anyway because it had to be done. It's still morally smudgy. But now suppose a different character is given that choice and has no idea that the consequences of option A will be bad. They make the choice they think is right, the bad consequences happen. It doesn't matter if they find out about those consequences or not, because there is one key difference between how we're inclined to judge these two characters. The second character didn't knowingly choose to make the bad stuff happen. That first character knew picking chocolate over strawberry would drop the cable car full of puppies, but the second character just thought it was about ice cream like any reasonable person. The consequences of their choices are the same, but all other things being equal, we as an audience are inclined to conclude that the second character is less morally responsible for what happened because they made their choice without realizing it would do anything bad. The only difference between the two scenarios is that the second character didn't know the bad thing would happen. Their ignorance protects them from bearing that moral weight. It was a completely innocent choice, unlike the first character who made an informed choice and knowingly caused the bad outcome. And frankly, even if both options were bad and that first character was stuck in a trolley problem with no good options, we're still reflexively inclined to find them more morally culpable than the second character because they knew the situation they were part of was going to have a terrible outcome. But what this conclusion implies is that a character who is pure of heart, who doesn't realize what they're doing is wrong, can cause any number of terrible consequences without compromising their pure of heart quality. The example of this question that gets thrown around most frequently is a pretty garden variety trolley problem. Should a hero kill a villain to save the lives of all that villain's future victims? If a pure-hearted hero with a code against killing has a choice between killing the villain once and for all and putting the villain in the world's most escapable jail, the hero will not kill the villain because that'll be against their morals. But then, when the villain escapes, they kill 100 people. Because the hero stuck with their principles, 100 innocent people died instead of just one really bad person. Does that mean the hero should have killed the villain? Not necessarily. Maybe the prison just needs some better fucking locks. How about that? But the point is, the hero stuck to their principles. If we're measuring just by pure...
Or you're Aang and you find a third solution and get rid of their ability to do the killing.
Pure of heart standards, that was unequivocally the right thing to do. Because it's not just one life versus...
Which I still think, like, such a clever, like, the way they use their magic system in Avatar The Last, like, this, I'm gonna gush on Avatar The Last Airbender for finding a third solution in this moral dilemma. That, right, like, the perfect subversion of this kind of trope. Because that entire time, they're like, you gotta kill him or he's gonna... he'll just come back and do bad things later, you know? You run that risk of him doing the bad later if you don't fucking kill him. Or he'll kill you if you don't kill him first, right? And then Aang finds a third solution. It's just that only the Avatar can do. It's just so... perfection. Just a great way of, like, establishing the magic system over the course of 3 seasons to then make that ability acceptable within the eyes of the audience. They did such a fucking fantastic...
versus 100 innocent lives.
Avatar The Last Airbender is a masterclass in storytelling. Yeah.
The factor we're missing in this equation is one life knowingly taken versus 100 innocent lives tragically lost through circumstance. Hell, the hero might never even learn about those 100 lives lost and will continue on their merry way totally guilt-free, just as pure-hearted as they were the day before. The moral weight of knowingly doing one bad thing tips the scales significantly. Even if the pure-hearted hero swallows their morals and actually kills the villain and saves 100 lives, the hero is now living with the guilt that they knowingly and willfully did something they knew was wrong. Those 100 lives don't make up for that. The hero is still compromised on their principles, and that makes them no longer pure of heart. It's an unforgiving metric that doesn't measure based on tangible good done, but on how guilty the character felt doing it. This is why paragons can be some of the most dangerous villains. If they think something is the right thing to do, they will do it, and with enough mental gymnastics to continue contort the situation into something their morals will accept as good, they can do basically anything and feel completely righteous about it. And that gets you into some real Deus Volti logic, where if you can convince yourself that you're working on behalf of a higher power that stamped you with the any means necessary seal of approval, you can get as stabby as you like on whoever you like and never feel the slightest twinge of fear for your immortal soul. I see you Crusader fanboys, get a hobby. Also, it's worth noting that not all pure of heart characters have a personal code against killing, and those are the guys to really watch out for, because if they decide killing someone is the right thing to do, there's literally no stopping them. Overall, a pure-hearted character can unknowingly enable or even actively do all kinds of truly awful stuff without ever compromising their internal moral compass, which is really the only thing a lot of these pure of heart stories measure. If they never find out anything bad happened, or they never realize that their actions were bad, they're basically existing in a moral vacuum where nothing bad ever did happen and their personal morals are just as squeaky clean as ever. And that's why it's an imperfect metric that often rings false with audiences. Sure, the character might not have known that letting the mass-murdering bad guy go would have such devastating collateral consequences, but they probably could have thought it through for a second first and realized something terrible was probably going to happen. Ignorance might keep them feeling guilt-free, but it doesn't erase the consequences of their actions, and an audience might have some trouble with a character that the story is framing as pure of heart, whose cheerful naivete has led to a lot of explicit death and destruction. Pure of heart becomes not my problem. And this isn't just a morally iffy bit of writing. There's also a lot more interesting stuff you can get out of this trope by actually letting the character confront moral complexity rather than shielding them from it. Charmingly dumb, pure of heart characters are loads of fun. Heck, that's a solid 2/3 of the himbo archetype right there. But you can get a lot of very interesting narrative mileage out of letting your pure of heart characters actually consider the moral consequences of their actions, and consciously seek out a solution that doesn't involve compromising their own personal morals or their practical morals through collateral damage. A pure of heart character who actually understands the circumstances of the trolley problem they're faced with won't willingly choose either option, because they can't without compromising their morals and thus their purity of heart, and will often go to great lengths to seek out a third option that'll work for them. It's not always possible, but a lot of stories have pulled off very hopeful and uplifting narratives by letting the pure of heart character actually succeed in finding an ideal solution. A solid example of this is the final struggle of Avatar: The Last Airbender, check it off your bingo cards, where Aang struggles with the moral quandary between his fundamentally pacifist air nomad philosophy versus his duty as Avatar to protect the world no matter the personal cost, which in this case involves taking out and probably killing Fire Lord Ozai. Aang is very distraught about this and even rings up previous avatars to ask for advice, and while they all have their own opinion and offer different advice, they're pretty unilaterally in team kill him and feel bad about it later. Aang ends up taking a third option and defeating Ozai by energy bending, which pulls double duty as good thematic storytelling, because not only is it a non-lethal option that'll utterly destroy Ozai without killing or even hurting him, but it's also its own supernatural worthiness test, because the inherent danger of it is that an energy bender with an even slightly corruptible soul will be totally consumed by the evil of the bendee. Aang carefully weighed his options and chose the absolutely most dangerous one possible because it was morally right. Also, fun fact, if you look closely, when Aang rallies and overwhelms Ozai, his tattoos glow, indicating that the final push that let him win was finally attaining inner peace with the Avatar state itself. So it all comes full circle, since Aang's been treating the Avatar state as a part of himself he fears and rejects, like a superpowered evil side. Once he accepts that it's just him, all that scariness drains away and he passes the supernatural worthiness test. So sure, ignorance is definitely the easier way to keep a pure of heart character looking morally spotless, but it doesn't hold up to scrutiny anywhere near as well as self-aware and thoughtful heroism does. Ultimately, this is a trope that examines intent, not action. If the character's intentions are completely good, however we're specifically measuring good, they can qualify as pure of heart. This means a character with a very narrow understanding of the world can very easily operate under a paradigm where all their choices are made with the best of intentions, because to them the world is a simple binary. Maybe, for instance, being nice is good, being mean is bad, so always be nice. A character with a more nuanced and broad understanding of the world, however, will often struggle to make choices that are 100% good by their personal metric, because it's very easy for definitions of good to come into conflict with each other. For instance, being nice might be good, but enabling someone's harmful behaviors is bad, but firmly telling them to knock it off would be mean and therefore bad. Essentially, the more complex the character's definition of good and bad or right and wrong are, the harder it is for the character to intentionally make a decision that they consider fully good. And since intent is the only thing pure of heart really measures, this means it's significantly easier to write a pure of heart character who is, in a word, dumb, or in a slightly less judgy word, uncomplicated. For such a simple trope, it's surprisingly difficult to make work, because it's drawing on such a nuanced and very fraught part of human nature. And maybe that shouldn't be surprising, frankly. There are ethical arguments that have been continuously running through scholarship for thousands of years. They're not going to work out the ideal solution in a kid's cartoon. So, yeah.
And that was Trope Talk Pure of Heart. This was good. I talked way longer than I thought I would. I thought this was going to be roughly at most 30 minutes, not over 40. I'm hungry. I want to go eat lunch. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.